Good afternoon. My name is Benito Huerta. I'm director and curator of the gallery at UTA, University of Texas at Arlington. We are here today for a presentation with James Cohan from James Cohan Gallery in New York City. He'll be talking about Bill Viola's work, whose work he represents, and then particularly the piece that we have in the gallery, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. I do want to say that today's presentation is in collaboration with the Visiting Artists Committee. Also, the gallery's exhibitions is being sponsored by Art Bridges, Arlington Camera, the Art and Art History Department and students, and Abraham Lopez Studio, Design Studio. Before we get going, I do want to say that the piece that we have of Bill Viola's in the gallery is called Mount Rainier, Moving Stillness. It was created in 1979. And even though it's in the gallery, we are having right now some technical problems that we hope to get resolved in the next day or so. But in the presentation, Jim will be showing a video of that piece so you can get an idea, especially since this is a virtual presentation at the moment. I do want to introduce James Cohan, otherwise known as Jim. Has been active in the contemporary art world for nearly 4 decades as a curator, advisor, artist agent, and art dealer. He has represented a prestigious roster of living artists, artist estates, and has sold artworks to art museums and major private collections in Europe, the US, and in Asia. In 1999, together with his wife, Jane, they opened James Cohan Gallery on West 57th Street. Since its founding, the gallery has presented a rigorous and varied programs, including solo exhibitions of gallery artists and thematic group exhibitions every year. The gallery has since moved and now has 2 locations in New York City. Jim is also president of Art 21 Board on the Foundation of the Art Dealers Association and on the Brooklyn Museum of Board Advisors. And one of the things I would also say is if anybody has any questions, there's a chat line on YouTube that you can send questions to, and we'll be having him answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Jim Cohan in New York City. So Jim, thank you for being with us, and I'm just going to let you take over, and you can talk to us a little bit about the gallery and a little bit about Bill Viola, and then we get on to the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you very much. I guess the first thing I want to say this afternoon is that, I'm an art dealer, I'm not an art historian, so, my remarks about Bill are very much...
So Jim, thank you for being with us, and I'm just going to let you take over, and you can talk to us a little bit about the gallery and a little bit about Bill Viola, and then we get on to the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you very much. I guess the first thing I want to say this afternoon is that, I'm an art dealer, I'm not an art historian, so, my remarks about Bill are very much inspired from firsthand experience with the work. I had the distinct pleasure of getting to know this work as a result of my relationship with another artist, Peter Campus. And in 1986, Peter was an artist being represented by Paula Cooper Gallery, where I was the director. And Peter just casually said, hey, there's an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art you might want to check out. And on a Monday, my day off, I went to Modern and I saw 3 pieces of Bill's, and it was totally blown away. And it was like an experience that I never had before. It was the moving image in an architectural space that just, hit me at my core. And I walked out of that exhibition thinking that something unparalleled in my experience as a young art dealer. And I scratched my head to think, how on earth could this ever become a part of, an art gallery economy? And that was to play out over a number of years. And very exciting uh, to be a part of the work since 1991. So maybe we go to the first slide. Right. So if we go to the next, yeah, right. So this is a piece from 1975. And it was a piece that I had first seen at an art fair, and it was being shown by Donald Young. He was a great dealer who since passed away. And it's a channel installation. And it was the first quote unquote video installation I'd ever seen at an art fair. And I was sort of blown away by, the kind of possibility of integrating this into, gallery situation. The operates quite simply. It's two channels. There's a pre-recorded channel in Bill Viola in front of the pot, which is on a simmering boil with eucalyptus leaves in it. The second channel is for a live channel that is pointed at the pot at exactly the same angle as it was recorded. And the viewer is asked, or kind of suggested, that they kneel in front of on a tatami mat. And what happens is, in the pre-recorded channel, Bill Viola is in a kind of meditative stance, and he picks up a glass of water and then drinks and then dribbles the water into the pot. So you're having this kind of sensorial experience of the sound of him dribbling the water into the pot that's sitting right in front of you, the smell of the eucalyptus leaves, and kind of aura of being a part of that psychic space. So that was something really pretty remarkable, that it should be at an art fair, because it's such a commercial environment, and this was like a purely meditative kind of piece. So we can go to the next slide. There's another side to making video from the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, that was really about not fitting in the commercial art world, and it was proposing a whole other idea, and that was that you made tape. And these VHS tapes were being sold for anywhere from $20 to $40. So artists were making single channel video that were being sold almost like CDs, or DVDs today. And Leo Costello Gallery started a division of his gallery to distribute these tapes. It's kind of beautiful idea, because it was purely about idea, and it had very little to do with commerce, and there was never the drive to make product per se, and it was so this is one of Bill's very famous pieces, which is a single channel, and it's called Reflecting Pool. And maybe if we go to the next slide, we can see the video, and we can watch maybe the first 4 or 5 minutes. So what I think we missed here was, we can keep the video going and I'll just talk over it for a second, is the sound of his shout as he jumps. So we're looking across a pool, it's the artist, it's Bill himself emerging from the greenery, and he stands at the edge of the water. He leaps, and with a shout, he hugs his legs and sort of enters into this fetal position. And one of the themes that is worth touching on throughout my little talk here is the way that technology plays into creating a psychological impact. You know, that this blending of these two distinct components, the kind of the anodyne idea of technology, which is really about engineering and mechanics, and then the artist's psyche on the other hand. And so in this case, he's using a kind of very basic and rudimentary kind of Photoshop or effect that he's able to blur his image out in the top half of the image, while the bottom half of the image continues to reflect, and it no longer is the reflection of him above. So eventually what will happen in about 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, is that Viola emerges naked from the pool and follows the path that he arrived, and he disappears back into the woods. So the movement of the body through the space as above and through water becomes the means in a way to like represent this kind of poetic state. And you can see the reflection over on the left-hand side of these other figures. So it's, I think for, you know, the generation of millennials, and even for, you know, this idea that there are no cuts, there's a kind of very still, slow evolution of these pieces presents a kind of challenge. And it's like present less, get more. You know, it's slowing down one's breath and taking in the detail of the moment. So maybe we go to the next slide, Patricia. So this is the piece that you all have installed in the gallery. And it's a work that was originally done in 1979 in Buffalo. And like so many early video works, it was really a kind of interesting experiment that we had drawings of, and we had photographs of, and obviously Bill was there to help us recreate it. And my colleagues in London had the idea that this is a piece that hadn't been shown since 1979. And they asked Bill whether he would be interested in reprising the piece, and that was probably about seven, 8 years ago. It is the image of Mount Rainier as it is so the sound that you're getting when you're in the installation is the sound of the wind hitting the microphone. And it's really this idea of the mountain as image rather than the more commonly perceived situation of the image as the mountain. So I think there might be another image. Yes. So what we're getting here is there's a 3-gun projector that is behind the screen that is floating above the pool. And this 3-gun projector, which is red, yellow, red, green, blue, is creating a single image. And that's really, this was like the standard operating procedure for video projectors for many years. The ability to generate a fully chromatic image depended upon having all of these guns lined up correctly and hitting the exact same point at the same moment. Well, what happens when you change the focal point of the guns is that you're going to obscure the image. So the image, the projector is pointed down towards the water. The water is then every once in a while disturbed by an invigilator, by a guard, who will change the aperture, and it will actually change the mirror-like finish of that pool of water, and you'll see the ripples. So maybe if we hit the So the piece kind of becomes like a poem about the fragility of nature, but even more to the point for Bill, I think at that point, was the fragility of the projected image. And this sense that the moving stillness was the, well, the sort of geologic time of the mountainscape. And this still shot, and then I think in a minute we'll see someone enter the picture and disturb the water. So we kind of missed that. That's too bad. Is that the? All right, little technical issue there. So what we missed in that image was, in that short clip, was someone coming up and actually agitating the water so that the image becomes obscured, and that you then enter into this kind of abstract world of the instability of the image, and that it's entirely dependent upon that water surface. It's the kind of the existence of the image is, as is written about, as delicately balanced optical system. We become evident of a short time spent in space. The mountain is constantly unraveling and reforming. It becomes a metaphor for the existence of the mountain as a conceptual image in the mind. The mountain never moves, only your mind does, as what Bill was talking about there. So it was a very interesting thing to be able to show a work like this, because younger artists have been playing with this idea as well. And someone like Diana Thader, who's an artist from California, has been dealing with the opticality of the 3-gun projector. And pardon me, this is is where it really takes its original form. Something that was always very moving to me about Bill's work and about his whole approach was that his belief that in 1974, when he was at Syracuse University and the handheld camera became available, the Sony Portapak, for him, it was the kind of, as he says, I gradually realized that the act of perception was in fact a viable form of knowledge in and of itself, and not merely a kind of phenomenon. This meant that when I held the video camera and microphone, I was holding a philosophical system, not just image and sound gathering tools. So that the camera itself became an extension of his psyche, and in that interest in kind of developing and exposing those ideas of the inner mind. This is a piece which was which I saw first at the Museum of Modern Art in '86, and it's called Room for St. John of the Cross. And there's a small black cubicle which stands in the center of the large dark room. And in that small room, in the front of the cubicle, there's a soft glow of incandescent light. On the back wall, there's a large screen which shows a projected black and white video image of snow-covered mountains. And that's a very unstable handheld camera, so it's a super jittery pattern. And there's the loud sound of roaring wind and lots of white noise that is just emanating throughout the room. The interior of the cubicle, which is not accessible to us, can only be viewed through the window. And the inner walls are white, and the floor is covered with brown dirt. And on the screen inside of that room is an image of Mount Rainier, which turns out is the same image as what's in the moving silence. So the only visible movement is caused by an occasional wind blowing through the trees. So, and what then you're seeing in the from within the cubicle is the sound of the voice softly reciting St. John's poems in Spanish, which is barely audible. And St. John of the Cross, he was a Spanish poet and a mystic who was held prisoner, and he wrote a whole series of really beautiful poems while he was in this cell. And he was unable to stand upright, and he was frequently tortured, as it is written. So during this period, he wrote many poems for which he is known. And what Bill was moved by, and he writes here, they often speak of love, ecstasy, passage through the dark night, and flying over city walls and mountains. So what was very moving about this and so many other works of that moment was that the white walls of the gallery became something very different that one was expecting. And it wasn't just a matter of looking at pictures on a wall in a kind of very refined space. It was a space that just became a kind of instrument of the psychology of the mind. And if we go to the next slide.
Jim?
Yeah.
Your camera moved, and so you're only showing partial face.
Pardon me.
So,
okay.
no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe, Pat, if we go to Patricia, go to the next slide, please. So this is just for students' purposes. I think it's kind of interesting to see that, you know, the kind of work that goes into creating these installations. It was a very considered series of drawings and a balancing act between understanding the technology needs as well as what it was to create a kind of sculptural environment. And like a sculptor, you know, the video artist at this time is really seizing space. And but it is a total balance between, you know, being very technically astute and understanding the bounds and trying to push the bounds of technology and having a kind of deep poetic. Then the next slide, I believe, is a piece called Numa, which is a work that is from '94. And maybe if we, what's happening in this piece is it's 3 channels of black and white video that were all shot. All the black and white video was shot with a surveillance camera, and it's kind of going in and out of focus. So you're having this. It's the work is called Pneuma, which is a Greek word that roughly translates as breath, sometimes also referred to as soul or spirit. And it's conceived as an underlying essence or life force that runs through all things of nature and animates or illuminates the mind, as it is written. So in this installation, images alternately emerge and submerge in a field of shimmering visual noise. The ground of all the images, they kind of hover. The threshold of recognition it's like the threshold of recognition and ambiguity. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that this is the drawing. So it was a room within a room, because projectors came through these holes in the corner, and then they were projecting onto. It was projecting directly into the corner. And then the next image, I believe, is the video, and we can watch the first couple minutes of this, and you'll get a sense of what we're talking about here. And again, there's white noise that exists in this piece, and sound has always been a big component of Bill's work. And early on, he was working with a guy named David Tudor and his Rainforest Symphony Orchestra. So he was very accustomed to understanding and became quite aware of what the potential for sound was. So at certain points, you just get the kind of video glow, that halo effect, and then it just reemerges into image. And it's a kind of very beautiful Zen experience of having few expectations, a kind of non-narrative path to connecting these images, and very poetic. Then maybe we'll go to the next image. Thank you. So this is a work that should be familiar to many of you, because it's called The Greeting. It's from 1995. It's installed at the Fort Worth Museum of Modern Art, and it has been for many years. I believe it's on view now. And like the previous work, Pneuma, where he's using very low-tech technology and surveillance cameras. Similarly, he's pushing the bounds of technology here, but on the other extreme. Because in 1995, there was a camera that existed. There were only 6 of these cameras in Los Angeles, and where they shot film at something on the order of 300 frames per second. And just to give you some frame of reference, when you're looking at the sporting event and they do slow motion, you're looking at 24 frames per second. So the ability to slow things down becomes that much easier with more visual content. So you have more frames per second, so you can extend time. You're literally just pulling it apart. So the wink or the kind of the sneer, whatever it might be, becomes this monumental experience when looking at it in such slow motion. This piece was based on Pontormo, painting of 4 women that is installed in Italy. What Bill did was he turned it into 3 people because the dynamic and complicated nature of having a conversation amongst 3 folks is that someone is invariably being left out of the conversation, or there's a kind of disconnect. And this relationship that he creates in what is seen as an encounter amongst these 3 women, and the woman in the orange comes into the frame and she begins to whisper to the woman across from her, and kind of pushing the woman from behind in blue slightly to the back, and so her involvement in this, whatever that message was or is, becomes that much more complicated. So again, using technology, but to create something that is a kind of timeless idea of the kind of encounter and how we read the psychology of those moments and the subtle interaction of people. And if you haven't seen it, you can absolutely hop over to Fort Worth. It's totally spectacular work of art. The next slide is, so this is a body of work which it represents a big part of Bill's work, and that is things having to do with water. And this is the 5 angels for the millennium. And at this point in his career, he was making a body of work about the passions and about emotions, and it was joy, anger, fear, and sorrow. So there were a series of portraits that were being made at that time. And in opposition to that, or in contrast to those portraits, were this series of the 5 angels. And it consisted of 5 individual video sequences showing clothed men plunging into pools of water. And they played simultaneously and repeated on a continuous loop. And the angel, or the figure, appears infrequently on each screen, breaking through the surface in a sudden explosion of light and sound. So this kind of shining bubbles float like stars in the night as the human form traverses the gap, as this is written from Bill's description of the piece, traverses the gap between heaven and earth, suspended from light and darkness, time and eternity, life and death. There is another piece that we can click to the next work, which is called Ascension, which came 1 year earlier. And this is a work that we showed and is in many museum collections. I think, in fact, it's in Houston. And I think if we go to the next slide, we can play the first 5 or so minutes of it. So he shot these works in a 17-foot pool, and where the camera was suspended on a crane above the pool. So you're looking straight down, and then oftentimes what you'll see in the actual video is the recording of the event reversed. So it's played backwards. Are we working here? I don't know if this video is operating or not. Oh yeah, it is. It's just, there's a moment of, right. I've fallen prey to the expectations. And again, we're missing the sound, which is super important. So I apologize for that.
Yes.
So this is a projection. So this would entail the use of a whole room. At around this time in about 2000, there was the evolution of flat panel monitors. And that was really the beginning of a whole trajectory of, Bill Viola operating within the gallery system. Up until this point, until about 2000, we would only be able to sell installations. And so you had fairly limited audience for that, between museums and foundations and, a handful of private collectors who had, these magnificent spaces. But then once the flat panel screen became readily available, it was just the kind of, I always describe it as a kind of crossover experience. It's like where the opera star makes the jazz album and where the video artist then became accessible to the collectors of painting and sculpture. And so that was super exciting for us because it was a way to help support some of the bigger projects, as well as to introduce him to just a whole broad spectrum of collectors and for that matter, for museums who didn't want to dedicate whole rooms to a single work of art. So the next slide, I believe, is right. So then this is in 2004. This is a bit of an odd story of like where life and art can intersect. There was that terrible tsunami in Thailand, and which caused such terrible devastation. This was done right around that time. This was a piece called The Raft. It was commissioned for the 2004 Olympics in Athens. And it is a collection of, I think it's 16, 17 people who are gathering almost as if they're at a bus stop. It's like there's just a random sampling of humanity that is finding itself waiting in a line for something. And I think is there a video of this? Yeah. So this was using that super slow motion camera where they're capturing things on film at 300 frames per second. So I have to apologize that what we're missing here in this piece is the sound, which is super critical. And it's a 5-point Dolby sound system that exists in this installation. So the roar of the 200,000 gallons of water that are hitting them from both sides is that much more impactful. What evolves over this 10 or 11-minute piece, which is actually about a minute in real time, is the transition from a kind of anonymity to a very intense intimacy, of where people then start caring for each other and are holding each other and really trying to all deal with that kind of crisis. So I think the last piece in my little slide presentation, so there you see the beginning and the end, this is a work that's called, well, it's okay, we can just go to Old Oak, is a work that's called Old Oak. And it's non-figurative work, which is really marries this notion of technology and humanity. And it's a single camera that is in a lockdown stance in front of an oak tree and it's about a 7-hour take, which is then reduced to 20 minutes. And what through editing they were able to do was Bill was able to work with his cameraman, Harry Dawson, who's someone that, along with his wife, Kira Perov, who, become intimate partners in all of these works, is that it goes from a pure darkness through dawn to the high sun. And as it hits high sun, the camera, the image is whited out and is bled as the sun is hitting the center of the lens. So it's a kind of, it's a very formal execution of this idea of the transition of time, the transition from black to white, and the kind of evolution of pulling time apart, but also then condensing it at the same time. There's a large version of this piece, which is an hour long, which is a very intense test of one's patience, because the first, say, 20 minutes of the piece is in almost complete blackness. And then the last bit of the piece is like this intense bright light, which is called The Darker Side of Dawn. This piece, Old Oak, is actually on a panel that is probably a little smaller, say 20 by 30 inches. So it just sort of exists in time and space, where you just watch time evolve. So that's really the essence of my talk, and kind of so if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to.
I think, Jim, that Patricia's going to see if there's any questions. But I'm sorry that the sound wasn't included, but also the images themselves are really very powerful, especially the last one with the water hitting the people. And I can't help myself in thinking of like the 60s, when there were blacks in the South that were being moved through these huge sprays of water. And it's a powerful scene, and it's also interesting enough, very beautiful. So
no, the horror, and sure, I mean, the use of big powerful water as a form of dealing with civil disobedience. Yeah. And then when the tsunami hit in 2004, I was instantly kind of thought, oh my God, I hope they don't see this as like something that would be somehow too topical. But in the end, I think it speaks for itself just as a really powerful work of art.
Patricia, are there any questions from someone with a lot of people?
There aren't any questions in the chat.
In thinking of like the 60s. There's a little bit of a delay, Jim, so.
No problem. There you are.
So one of the things that you were talking about are the cameras that he's used that would take so many frames per second. I mean,
yeah.
That was pretty innovative at that time.
Yeah, definitely. I think each piece is kind of, on the one hand, it's pushing the sort of poetic ideas and the boundaries of what can be done in terms of creativity, but then it's also thinking through, what technologically is available to him. And he's made his work in Long Beach, California, so it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to LA. So that has certainly helped in making the movie industry available to him. Although I think he's always been very resistant to diving into that sector and being more interested in avant-garde theater has always been critical, and working with the kind of actors that he's worked with. They come out of more of a performance kind of innovative theater than they do out of Hollywood per se.
Do you think that sometimes I think that when artists move from one location to another, going say from East Coast to West Coast, that also has an effect, a psychological effect, maybe subtle, but in how they create their work. Do you think that's true over the course of his life?
Well, I think, Bill and Kira, and I should say that, like in so many relationships with artists, there's his partnership with his wife, Kira Peroff, was instrumental in how the work evolved. And they were in New York, and then they received in the late 70s, and in early 1980, 81, they moved to Japan. And that was a big shift. So location had a huge influence. There was the introduction to various Zen masters and being able to think outside of Western thought and learn more about that was really important. And then when they moved to the West Coast, certainly the desert became an enormously powerful source of inspiration. And there's a piece called Hatsuyumi and various other pieces that take advantage of that landscape that probably wouldn't have been available if he were on the East Coast.
There's another piece here at the Dallas Museum of Art that I think is about fire and water.
Yep, the crossing.
The crossing. That's that you're talking about. The installations would take up a whole room. That actually literally takes up a really large room.
Yes.
There's actually water coming down.
Right. Right. On one side of the screen, it's a double-sided projection. There's one side is a figure that's walking from very far away, and what happens here? And he is basically emulates. And then on the other side of the screen, The opposite side, you have a figure that is submerged by water and consumed by water. And so in both those, he is using digital effects there, special effects. But it's, speaking to the power of the elements for sure. And the ability for the elements to overwhelm any, the human psyche, if you will.
Thank you. Let me see if Patricia has any questions. Patricia?
No, I'm sorry. I don't know if it's a problem with my computer, but I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay. Again, we're trying new territory here, so.
If you could give any advice to a new student of photography and film, what would you say?
If you were to give advice to a film student or photography, what would you give them?
Oh, well, wearing my hat as a gallerist, I'd certainly say, learn your craft as best you can. Have as many tools in your toolbox as possible. Don't let medium become your, kind of limiting factor. And, have as broad a range of interests in, the humanities, because it's a long career that one has, and you need to have you want a deep well of information and knowledge to pull from. So I think two things are happening simultaneously. One is you're working on your craft. The other is you're developing a set of conceptual notions as to why that work exists. And you need to harness both those things simultaneously.
Yeah. So we do have a film video area called cinematic arts, and I think that was a question from one of the students there. So yeah. I think that one of the things we have conversations about is the kind of video art that Viola has created, and also versus the more narrative type of video work. So. Right. For me, it's like, they're two very distinct, very different genres, but at the same time, there's sometimes this crossover between them. And, when that kind of happens, I'm not sure, where does it sit in the movie theater, or does it sit in a gallery? How would you, come, if somebody were coming to you, how would you, what's your experience in the past in dealing with those situations?
I mean, I think probably the best answer I can give is it's not binary. It's not an either or situation. There's room for all sorts of things, and I think Steve McQueen would be an incredible example of that. That he's someone who has made incredibly powerful art installations, who has also continued to make tremendous cinematic contributions, winning an Academy Award for 12 Years a Slave, is his more recent series that's, I think, on Amazon. So, there's another artist I work with named Omer Fast, and I think he is someone who works with a very strong narrative, and could easily, many of his films could be seen in theaters, but I think the mindset with which you see them when you're in a museum is quite a different experience. So.
Okay, I've been informed that there are some questions on YouTube. I'm trying to get the YouTube up on this end. Let's see.
Yeah, you could just ask.
As a young photographer who hasn't found their style, what is something a photographer must have to succeed in the industry?
One of the questions that is coming through is, as a young photographer um, coming up,
Who hasn't found their style?
who hasn't found their style, what would you suggest as far as
What they need to
What-
succeed?
what they need to succeed, which is in the art world, is I think sometimes that's difficult to predict. But what would you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's I think it's a matter of just continually working through one's set of ideas and coming upon that themselves, and it being an organic process.
Yeah.
So,
I think one of the things I tell my professional practices class is that the art world's kind of fickle. You know, you can't predict what's going to be what trending at that time. You can't predict what's going to be selling. None of that. And for me, I always try to reinforce the idea that one should do it because they love doing it, and that
Yeah.
passion will hopefully come across. And if their ideas are strong and their craftsmanship are strong, you know, and at some point maybe they might get some attention. And sometimes that attention, it could be for a moment, or it could be over a career, over a lifetime.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. No, I don't think I really appreciated how vulnerable one is as an artist until I opened up my own gallery. And I had been working for other dealers 17, 18 years. And then when I finally started programming the exhibitions and making those sort of choices, in one tiny little bit of a fraction did I understand the vulnerability that exists for the artist. So, you know, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for what that's all about. But I also know that um, every exhibition reveals its intention, and you know, you need to make it because it needs to be there. You can't just make something. You know, you have a space and you need to crank something out.
Yeah.
That is very clear over time.
okay, let me see if there's one more question, and then we'll probably end it right after that. Is there another one?
What's the best part of being a gallerist, and what's the most challenging?
This was a good one. Well, what's the best part of being a gallerist, and also the most challenging?
Uh, you know, it's probably the same. The answer could be the same, and that is, you know, the most fascinating aspect of our world is that we get to work with really smart artists, and we're constantly learning, and and believing in the set of ideas that they're espousing and what they're working towards. The difficulty is that sometimes you gain acceptance in the outside world for that belief, and sometimes you don't. But you know, we stay committed to our vision and our commitment to these artists, and we want to see them succeed. So it's just building a community of people that are of like mind. So that's, and you know, the best part of my day is when I get to install an exhibition. And when you're actually handling a work of art and you're thinking about what looks good next to what, and how it should be seen, and with my colleagues, you know, having that kind of discussion is, I pinch myself and say how lucky we are to be doing this.
I strongly agree with that statement as a curator.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that part when the exhibition comes, the work comes into the gallery, and you start making decisions about where they go. It's just probably one of the best moments of the job.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you start thinking about the objects in a different way.
Yeah.
And then you know, our job is to try and communicate to let those ideas be communicated as clearly as possible. And so it's, you don't want to overhang, you don't want to underhang, you don't want to make something too precious, but you want people to pay attention to some of the more salient ideas. So.
Well,
Great.
thank you, Jim. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and some really good insights into the work and into the business as well. I do
And our
wanna thank
next presentation is on Breen Butt. That's on March 31st, on Wednesday at 12:30. Her work is right behind me in the gallery. And then, as I've mentioned, have mentioned before in the previous broadcast, that is part of a 3-person show in the Outer Gallery, in which is Nila Kayam Aga, Ambreen Butt, and Samin Farhat. And that exhibition will be up until April 3rd, and hopefully the Bill Viola piece will also be up and running in the next few days. But if you're coming to just to see that, make sure you call the gallery at 817-272-3110, and they will let you know. But the Outer Gallery exhibition is also very wonderful, and I hope you get to see that as well. Thank you all for your attention, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.